5 bikers, confident in their invincibility, tore through 72-year-old Harold Winston's garden. They ripped down the flag, stubbed out a cigarette on his porch, and shoved the elderly man, laughing at his supposed helplessness. Their leader sneered, claiming that the judge title was just a garden decoration and that Harold was nothing more than an old relic. But they had no idea who they were dealing with. One phone call, just one, and their world turned upside down. What happened next left the entire neighborhood stunned. But let's start from the beginning. A warm southern evening blanketed the small town of Elm Grove. Harold Winston, a 72-year-old retiree, tended carefully to his prized rose garden. With his cardigan neatly buttoned and glasses perched on his nose, he looked every bit the part of a quiet, unassuming gentleman. The only threat in sight was his perpetually grumpy cat, Chester, who lounged lazily on the porch, glaring at the world with disdain. The serenity was shattered by the roar of engines. 5 massive motorcycles roared onto Harold's quiet street, their riders exuding a rough, chaotic energy. Leather jackets, adorned with skulls and chains, glinted in the setting sun. They pulled up directly in front of Harold's pristine yard, their presence as subtle as a wrecking ball. Harold straightened up from his roses, adjusted his glasses, and looked at them with quiet curiosity. "Hey, old man," shouted the leader, a burly figure with a beard streaked with gray and a jagged scar cutting across his cheek. "Your little house is so neat and tidy, makes me want to mess it up a bit." Harold tilted his head, studying the intruders as if they were an unusual species of bird that had landed in his garden. "Oh, by all means, make yourselves at home. Would you like some tea or maybe a picnic blanket?" The leader froze for a second, clearly caught off guard, but then his face twisted into a mocking grin. "Tea? This old geezer thinks we're here for a tea party," he bellowed, and his crew erupted in laughter. That was their green light. One of the bikers stepped forward, yanking down the American flag that fluttered proudly on Harold's porch. "Don't think you'll be needing this," he sneered, crumpling the flag into a ball and tossing it into the dirt. Chester flicked his tail in annoyance but remained perched on the porch. Harold, however, stood still, his calm gaze locked on the biker. "That flag wasn't cheap," Harold said evenly, pulling off his gardening gloves. "But who am I to argue with your artistic expression?" "Oh, Grandpa's got jokes," laughed another biker, a wiry man with a tattered bandana and a patchy beard. He aimed a kick at one of Harold's flamingo lawn ornaments, toppling it over. Harold didn't flinch. "Your sense of humor is almost as impressive as your manners," Harold replied coolly, watching as the leader strode onto his porch and pressed a lit cigarette against the wooden railing, leaving a smoldering black mark. "You really think you're funny, old man?" the leader sneered, stepping closer to Harold. "No," Harold said with a faint smile. "I think I'm observant." That remark drew another round of raucous laughter from the bikers. Meanwhile, one of them had started pulling up Harold's rose bushes, another had set his sights on Chester, raising a garden tool to shoo the cat away. But Chester had other plans. With an angry yowl, the orange ball of fur launched himself at the biker, claws out, leaving a trail of scratches before disappearing into the bushes. "Your crazy cat's as nuts as you are," the biker yelled, clutching his face. Harold smirked. "It's a family trait." "All right, enough games," growled the leader. "This house is going to be our little masterpiece of chaos." As the gang erupted into laughter again, Harold slowly pulled a phone from his cardigan pocket and began dialing. "Go ahead," he said calmly, his steely gaze fixed on the leader. "But be prepared to become part of history." A low wail of sirens in the distance was the first sign that Harold was not the man they thought he was. The chaos escalated as the bikers turned Harold's meticulously kept garden into a battlefield. Rose bushes were trampled under heavy boots, a wheelbarrow was overturned, and a ceramic gnome sailed through the air, smashing into pieces on the driveway. They seemed to find endless joy in the destruction, their raucous laughter echoing through the quiet neighborhood. Harold stood perfectly still, his hands folded in front of him, watching with an unnerving calm. His piercing gaze followed every move, as if he were silently cataloging each offense. "Yo, check this out," shouted one of the bikers, a wiry man with a torn vest. He yanked a small sign out of the ground that read, "Judge Harold Winston, Honorary Citizen of Elm Grove." "Judge Harold Winston?" the man bellowed, waving the sign like a trophy. Looks like Grandpa here thinks he's some kind of VIP. The rest of the gang howled with laughter. Even the leader cracked a grin as he sauntered toward Harold, towering over the older man with an air of mockery. "Judge, huh? You don't look like a judge to me," he sneered. "You look like an old, washed-up geezer who's in way over his head. Maybe it's time you learned how to respect real men." With a deliberate shove, the leader pushed Harold backward. Harold staggered, but didn't fall. Instead, he straightened his cardigan, adjusted his glasses, and looked up at the man with a calm that could freeze fire. "Oh, don't mind me," Harold said, his voice cold and steady. "Enjoy yourselves. After all, you don't have much time left." The laughter that followed was almost deafening. "What's that supposed to mean, old man? You gonna bore us to death with your legal talk?" the leader mocked, stepping closer. Harold didn't answer. His eyes darted briefly to the left, where Mrs. Thompson, his neighbor, was peeking out from behind her curtains, her face pale with worry. He gave her a slight nod, as if to say, "It's under control." Meanwhile, another biker, a man with a bright red bandana, grabbed a garden hoe and started swinging it like a baseball bat. "Hey, boss, think I could hit a home run with one of these fancy roses?" he jeered, aiming for a vibrant red bloom. Harold tilted his head slightly. "You're welcome to try," he said, "though I'd recommend a helmet. You might need it soon." "Is this guy serious?" the biker scoffed. But something in Harold's tone made him hesitate for just a second. The leader slapped the biker on the shoulder. "Relax. He's bluffing. What's he gonna do, call his knitting club to back him up?" The gang erupted into laughter again, but Harold was already reaching into his cardigan pocket. Slowly, deliberately, he pulled out his phone and began dialing. The leader snorted. "Who you calling, Grandpa? The cops? They don't show up for a couple of busted flowers." Harold raised his gaze, meeting the leader's mocking eyes. "No," Harold said, his tone as icy as winter. "Not the police. I'm calling someone who actually knows how to handle people like you." A flicker of uncertainty crossed the leader's face, but he quickly masked it with bravado. "Yeah, sure, call whoever you want. We're not scared of your bingo buddies." But as Harold pressed the final digit, the faint wail of sirens in the distance began to creep into the air. The bikers froze, their laughter dying down as they exchanged uneasy glances. Harold allowed himself the faintest of smiles. "Tick-tock," he said softly, slipping the phone back into his pocket. The sound of sirens grew louder, and for the first time, the gang's swagger faltered. The distant wail of sirens grew louder, their sharp cries cutting through the laughter of the bikers. The leader's smirk faltered, his eyes darting toward Harold, who stood as calm as ever, hands folded neatly in front of him. Moments later, 3 police cruisers screeched to a halt in front of Harold's house, lights flashing like an accusatory spotlight. Right behind them, 2 sleek black SUVs pulled up, their tinted windows reflecting the stunned faces of the bikers. The air seemed to grow heavier as the door swung open, and out stepped a group of armed men in dark suits, each moving with precise, purposeful strides. "What the?" the leader stammered, his bravado evaporating as the suited figures began forming a perimeter around the gang. From the lead SUV emerged a tall man in a crisp suit and tie, his sharp features radiating authority. He walked straight toward Harold, completely ignoring the bikers, as though they were nothing more than a minor inconvenience. "Judge Winston," the man said with unmistakable respect, inclining his head slightly. "Are you all right, sir?" Harold allowed himself a small smile as he removed his glasses and tucked them into his cardigan pocket. "Quite all right, Jim," he replied, his voice steady but laced with subtle amusement. "Just a few gentlemen who decided my roses needed rearranging." The man named Jim turned, his expression darkening as he finally acknowledged the bikers. "Gentlemen," he repeated, his tone dripping with irony. "I see no gentlemen here." The leader of the bikers took an uncertain step backward, his usual swagger replaced by a growing sense of panic. "Hey now," he began, raising his hands in a weak attempt at surrender. "We didn't mean anything by it, just a little fun, you know? No harm done." Jim's sharp gaze landed on him, silencing any further excuses. 2 of the suited men stepped forward, grabbing the leader firmly by the arms before he could bolt. "Fun?" Harold finally spoke, his calm demeanor giving way to a voice that carried the weight of authority. "Was it fun when you desecrated the flag? Was it fun when you destroyed my property? Or perhaps you found it amusing to threaten an elderly man on his own porch? The bikers stood frozen, their faces pale as they finally began to understand the depth of their mistake. You have no idea who you've tangled with, Harold continued, his voice rising just enough to command absolute attention. I am a justice of the Supreme Court of the United States, and now you will answer for every broken branch, every act of intimidation, and every insult to this community. A stunned silence fell over the scene, broken only by the click of handcuffs as the suited men began systematically detaining the bikers. Wait, the leader protested, his voice rising an octave. We didn't know, we swear we didn't know. Harold's gaze was cold and unyielding. Not knowing doesn't absolve you, he said simply. It just makes you reckless. As the bikers were loaded into the waiting vehicles, a small crowd of neighbors began to gather on the sidewalk, whispering in awe and snapping photos with their phones. Mrs. Thompson, still clutching her curtain, gave Harold an enthusiastic thumbs up from her window. The next morning, the incident dominated local news. Headlines declared, "Biker gang arrested after confrontation with Supreme Court justice." Clips of the bikers being led away in cuffs went viral, their bravado now a distant memory. Back in his garden, Harold resumed tending to his roses, humming softly to himself as if nothing had happened. Chester sprawled lazily on the porch, eyeing the repaired flagpole with satisfaction. A knock at the gate drew Harold's attention. It was his neighbor, Mr. Walker, who looked at him with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. "Judge Winston," Walker said, shaking his head with a grin, "how in the world did you stay so calm through all that?" Harold straightened up, brushing a speck of dirt from his cardigan. "I've spent my life dealing with people who think they're above the law," he said with a faint smile. "You learn to let them dig their own holes. Then, you simply hand them a shovel." Walker laughed, giving Harold a firm handshake before heading back to his own yard. As Harold returned to his roses, Chester let out a contented purr. "Back to normal, my friend," Harold said, giving the cat a gentle pat. "Justice, as always, is best served cold."